He brought her water, but I was the one left parched. For her the sun had begun its lazy descent over the small construction site, painting the dust in shades of gold. I was crouched near the edge of the foundation, wiping sweat from my brow, when she appeared, moving through the open gate with the kind of poise that made everything around her seem quieter, slower. Her heels crunched lightly on the gravel, and even from a distance, there was a calm confidence in the way she held herself. If you liked my story, then subscribe my channel. She stopped near the water cooler, glancing around as if searching for something, or someone. That's when our eyes met. There was a brief flicker of recognition, though we had never spoken, never shared more than this silent space. I handed her a bottle, the cool plastic slightly slick under my fingers. When our hands brushed for a moment, it betrayed me instantly, skipping beats as I tried to mask the sudden flutter of nerves. If you liked my story, then subscribe my channel. Her smile widened as she stepped inside, a faint perfume trailing in her wake. She apologized for dropping by unannounced, her voice calm and warm, and for a moment I was struck by the way she moved, graceful, assured, yet somehow approachable. I noticed the subtle gestures that betrayed her humanity, a small laugh at something trivial, the way her fingers lingered on the doorframe as she glanced around the room, and the soft tilt of her head when she spoke. We exchanged polite greetings, but beneath the casual conversation, an unspoken tension hummed quietly. Every glance she cast my way seemed to linger a moment longer than expected, and I found myself acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her presence. My hands felt clammy, my chest tight, and yet my mind raced to convince myself that it was just nerves. She settled herself in the living room, moving with the kind of ease that comes from confidence and experience. The sunlight highlighted the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, lines that spoke of laughter and stories, of years lived fully. I, in contrast, felt young, awkward, and acutely conscious of every breath and movement I made in her presence. As we spoke, I caught myself watching her hands, the way they brushed against objects, the subtle sway as she laughed, the quiet steadiness of her posture. Each movement seemed magnified, charged with meaning I couldn't fully articulate. And then, in a brief, fleeting moment, her hand brushed mine, not enough to be noticeable, but enough to send a shiver down my spine. My heart betrayed me again, reminding me that I was no longer just a passive observer. When she excused herself briefly to make herself comfortable, I was left alone in the room, my mind tangled with the strange exhilaration of having someone so magnetic in my space. I realized that what should have been a normal, quiet afternoon had been quietly transformed into something far more complicated, and far more intoxicating, than I could have anticipated. The afternoon stretched lazily, the golden light spilling across the living room, dust motes dancing in the beams. She was still there, comfortably settled on the sofa with a cup of tea in her hands, and I couldn't help but notice the quiet confidence in the way she sat. Her posture was relaxed, yet every movement radiated subtle grace, a tilt of her head, a soft laugh at something I said, the slight brush of her fingers against the cup rim. We drifted into conversation, casual at first. She asked about my week, my studies, my small routines. And yet, beneath the polite exchanges, a current ran between us, unspoken but undeniably present. I found myself leaning slightly closer when she spoke, drawn not just by curiosity but by an inexplicable pull I couldn't ignore. Every glance she cast my way seemed loaded with meaning. When she laughed at a small joke, our eyes met, and for a fraction of a second, her gaze lingered just long enough for my chest to tighten. I felt a warmth I couldn't quite explain, a quiet flutter that left me both exhilarated and uncertain. Her presence was magnetic, and I was acutely aware of my own reactions, the subtle quickening of my heartbeat, the nervous brush of my fingers against the edge of the sofa. She reached over to adjust a throw pillow near me, and our hands brushed, lightly, almost accidentally. A spark jolted through me, and I caught myself staring at my hand afterward, as if it held some secret connection. I felt a mixture of thrill and guilt, the kind of forbidden excitement that comes from noticing someone in a new, intimate way, even when the situation seems ordinary to the world outside. As the conversation deepened, she shared small stories from her life, memories of childhood mischief, professional frustrations, and little joys she had found along the way. I listened intently, fascinated by her experiences and the gentle wisdom in her words. When she paused, I found myself subtly inching closer, just to remain in the warmth of her presence. She seemed to notice, too. There was a slight smile playing on her lips, as if she was aware of the silent tension threading between us. At one point, she leaned forward to pick up her cup, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume, soft, floral, lingering. My mind betrayed me again, caught up in the sensory details, in the closeness of her, and the unexpected electricity that seemed to flow in the space between us. Each accidental touch, each lingering glance, was magnified in my awareness, turning a simple afternoon into a quiet battlefield of emotion. By the time she stood to stretch, I realized with both thrill and apprehension that I had been utterly captivated. There was no dramatic confession yet, no overt declaration of desire, but the connection was undeniable. A shared glance as she moved past me, a fleeting brush of her arm, left me with a lingering ache of anticipation. As she settled back onto the sofa, our conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the undercurrent remained: two people, aware of each other in ways neither fully understood yet, slowly dancing around the invisible barrier of propriety, curiosity, and undeniable attraction. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that nothing about this ordinary afternoon would feel ordinary again. The rain had begun to fall outside, tapping gently against the windows in a soothing rhythm. The soft, muted light of the overcast afternoon cast the room in a calm, intimate glow, as if the world outside had slowed just for us. We were sitting across from each other, our mugs of tea steaming between us, and for the first time, the conversation shifted from polite small talk to something more personal. She shared a story about a recent disappointment at work, a project that hadn't gone as planned, and the frustration she felt despite her best efforts. Her voice was calm, almost even, but there was a subtle tremor, a vulnerability that she didn't openly display to most people. I listened intently, leaning slightly forward, captivated by the quiet honesty in her words. There was something grounding about her presence, the way she made space for me to simply be there, to listen, to care. As she spoke, I found myself drawn into the nuances of her gestures, the way her fingers lightly traced the rim of her mug, the gentle tilt of her head when she was thinking, the almost imperceptible sigh as she recounted her day. Each movement carried meaning, and I felt a strange mixture of admiration and protectiveness welling up inside me. My own hands found the warmth of my mug again, but I was acutely aware of how close she seemed, the shared quiet making the distance between us feel smaller than it actually was. Then, almost instinctively, I shared a small piece of my own life, a story I rarely told anyone, about a moment of failure that still lingered in my mind. Her eyes softened as she listened, and she reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against my hand. The touch was fleeting, almost accidental, but it sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just physical, it was intimate, a silent acknowledgement of understanding and shared humanity. For a long while, we just sat in companionable silence, listening to the rain, letting the weight of unspoken words hang between us. Her presence was calming, yet it stirred something deeper, a tension I couldn't fully name. There was a pull in the way she looked at me, the quiet steadiness in her gaze, the soft way she leaned in when sharing a thought. It was as if, in this small, ordinary room, we had created a private world where nothing else mattered. A laugh broke the tension, soft and melodic, over a shared anecdote about childhood mischief. Our eyes met, and for a moment, we lingered there, acknowledging something unspoken. Her smile was gentle, patient, and it left a warmth lingering in my chest long after she had turned her attention elsewhere. By the time she moved to stand and stretch, the emotional intimacy between us had deepened, though either of us spoke of it directly. I felt a quiet, growing connection, the kind that made ordinary gestures, like brushing her hair back from her face or passing a book across the table, feel charged with meaning. As she resumed her seat, our conversation returned to lighter topics, but the subtle current remained, a shared trust, a hint of longing, and the awareness that something meaningful was quietly unfolding between us. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that this was the moment where our hearts began to recognize each other, even if our minds were still catching up. Evening had settled in, painting the sky in muted shades of indigo and amber. The living room was bathed in soft, golden lamplight, the kind that makes the world feel smaller and more intimate. Outside, the gentle drizzle continued, the rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the windows echoing the quiet tension between us. We found ourselves sitting close on the sofa, ostensibly to watch a movie, but the screen became little more than background noise. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, subtle but persistent, and every brush of her hand against mine, whether reaching for popcorn or adjusting a pillow, sent my heart into unexpected flutters. Our glances lingered longer than they should, and I realized with a jolt that every minor movement, her fingers brushing over the fabric of my sleeve, the soft tilt of her head when laughing, was magnified in my mind. It wasn't just attraction, it was fascination, a quiet acknowledgement that we were both aware of the unspoken tension threading the space between us. A laugh escaped her at something trivial on the screen, and I noticed the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, a fleeting softness that made me ache to understand her even more. My own attention wavered from the movie entirely, caught up in the subtle rhythm of her presence. The air felt charged, every shared breath, every accidental touch, seemed to hum with a quiet possibility that neither of us dared voice. And yet, restraint held me back. I felt a deep, almost physical hesitation, the knowledge that we were crossing boundaries not in words but in the silent language of glances, proximity, and the gentle warmth of shared space. Part of me wanted to close the gap, to let the tension finally unravel, but another part held back, conscious of the implications, the delicate balance of respect and desire. She shifted slightly closer, laughing at a joke I made, and our arms brushed deliberately this time, sending a shiver down my spine. I caught myself staring at the curve of her smile, the subtle grace in the movement of her hands, and the warmth that radiated from her presence. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and utterly impossible to ignore. For a moment, our eyes met, and the world shrank to just the two of us, the rain outside, the muted glow of the lamp, the quiet hum of shared energy. There was no need for words, the tension spoke for itself. We both knew the pull was real, undeniable, and dangerous in its subtlety. Finally, the movie ended, though neither of us seemed to notice. She stretched and stood, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and I realized with a sinking mix of relief and longing that the evening had shifted something fundamental between us. The tension lingered, heavy and sweet, like the echo of a song you can't get out of your head. As she prepared to leave for the night, we exchanged a lingering look, silent, loaded, and filled with promise. Neither of us spoke the words out loud, but the connection was unmistakable. And as the door closed behind her, I remained on the sofa, acutely aware of the ache her presence had left behind, knowing that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a gentle glow across the kitchen. Steam rose from mugs of coffee as I poured a cup for myself, and just like yesterday, she was there, quiet, composed, and somehow impossibly close without seeming intrusive. The casualness of her presence was disarming. I found myself noticing the small details again, the way her fingers curved around her mug, the soft crease at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the warm morning air. We moved through the room like two dancers learning the steps, brushing past each other in ordinary tasks, she reaching for a teaspoon, I adjusting a dish towel, and each accidental touch sent a quiet thrill up my spine. Nothing was overt, nothing forced, yet every gesture carried weight. It was as if the world had been reduced to these tiny, intimate moments, each one magnified in importance. She handed me a sugar packet, her fingers brushing mine deliberately this time. I swallowed, caught off guard by the warmth of the contact and the softness in her glance. A fleeting smile passed between us, subtle but full of unspoken acknowledgement. My chest felt lighter and heavier at the same time, lighter because I was close to her, heavier because the magnetic pull between us was undeniable. As we settled at the small kitchen table, we began exchanging books. She had picked one she thought I might like, and I offered a novel in return. Our fingers touched while passing the pages, and each brush seemed to linger just a moment longer than necessary. The simplicity of the gesture, mundane to anyone else, felt profound in the context of our growing connection. I realized how much I craved these small interactions, how each one built layers of intimacy that words could never fully capture. We laughed softly over shared anecdotes, teasing each other gently about our different tastes in literature. Her laugh was light, but the warmth it carried resonated deep in my chest, echoing the familiarity and comfort that was slowly forming between us. When I reached for my cup, her hand brushed mine again. This time, I didn't pull away. I let it linger, the warmth spreading through me, a quiet acknowledgement of feelings that were still unspoken but growing impossible to ignore. Later, she leaned forward to adjust a cushion behind my back, and our eyes met in that fleeting, suspended moment. Neither of us said anything, yet the tension hummed between us, quiet but persistent. It wasn't about words or grand gestures. It was about the shared space, the subtle brush of skin, the silent understanding that something meaningful was unfolding. By the end of the morning, as she prepared to leave, I realized that the world outside no longer felt quite as important. The ordinary moments we shared, the brush of a hand, the shared laughter, the passing of a book, had become extraordinary. I was acutely aware that these small gestures were building something far greater than either of us had anticipated, a connection that was tender, intimate, and undeniable. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that this slow burn journey wasn't about rushing or dramatic confessions. It was about the quiet accumulation of moments, each one deepening the bond between us in ways that neither of us could yet fully articulate. Evening had wrapped the city in a soft, amber glow, and the room felt smaller, warmer, more intimate than ever. The faint sound of rain pattering against the windows continued, a gentle rhythm that mirrored the nervous flutter in my chest. We sat close on the sofa, the air between us charged with a quiet anticipation that neither of us had yet named aloud. The conversation had drifted from casual topics to something deeper, memories of childhood, fears we rarely voiced, and moments that had shaped us. I realized I was hanging on her every word, noticing the subtle inflections in her voice, the way her eyes softened when she spoke honestly, the warmth of her hand brushing against mine as she reached for her cup. A pause fell over us, comfortable yet laden with unspoken emotion. I could feel the tension building, the kind that makes your stomach tighten and your heart race without warning. My hand found hers, hesitantly at first, just enough to gauge her reaction. Her fingers lingered against mine, warm and steady, and a wave of vulnerability washed over me. This was it, the moment where our carefully guarded emotions could no longer stay silent. I started, my voice catching slightly. I don't know why I feel this, but being around you feels different. Every time we talk, every time we're close like this, it feels important. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes soft and unreadable, but filled with something that made my chest ache. There was no judgment there, only understanding, as if she had been waiting for me to speak the words I hadn't dared to say. Her hand moved, gently resting over mine, a touch that sent warmth up my arm and made me aware of every heartbeat. "I've felt it too," she said quietly, her voice steady, yet threaded with a vulnerability that matched mine. "I didn't want to complicate things, but I can't deny it anymore." The weight of confession hung in the air, heavy and sweet. We didn't speak for a long moment, letting the silence carry the intensity of the truth we had finally shared. My heart, which had betrayed me countless times over the past days, now felt steady and seen, as though acknowledging her feelings had given it permission to breathe. She leaned slightly closer, just enough for our shoulders to touch, and the warmth of her presence enveloped me. The subtle rise and fall of her chest, the quiet exhale as she spoke, the way her fingers interlaced with mine, it was a sensory symphony that grounded me, even as my mind raced with the newness of it all. The unspoken tension of the past days, the lingering glances, the gentle touches, and the shared moments of quiet intimacy, all of it had led to this point. A slow, deliberate smile passed between us, and for the first time, the possibility of a future together didn't feel like something forbidden, it felt inevitable, fragile but real. As the night deepened, we remained close, letting the soft glow of the lamp and the rhythm of the rain outside cradle us. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, only the quiet acknowledgement of mutual desire and understanding. And in that space, I realized that this slow-burn connection, built from subtle touches, shared laughter, and heartfelt vulnerability, was far more powerful than anything I had anticipated. The morning light spilled gently through the curtains, soft and golden, painting the room in a calm warmth. The quiet hum of the city outside felt distant, almost irrelevant, as if the world itself had slowed to give us this moment. She was sitting across from me at the small kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a mug of steaming coffee, and for the first time in days, the tension that had hovered between us had melted into something serene and comfortable. We spoke softly, laughing over shared memories and teasing each other about small quirks. Every glance felt deliberate but easy, every touch, an accidental brush of fingers, a gentle nudge as we reached for the same book, carrying the weight of intimacy that had grown over the past weeks. It was no longer about stolen glances or suppressed longing. It was about presence, trust, and the quiet acknowledgement of what we both felt. She leaned back slightly, stretching, and our hands met again on the table. This time, there was no hesitation. Our fingers intertwined naturally, warmth spreading through my chest, steady and grounding. The small gestures that had once made my heart race now felt familiar and comforting, like the soft rhythm of a song I knew by heart. "Good morning," she said softly, her eyes catching the light in a way that made them shimmer. I'm glad we're here." I smiled, my own voice catching slightly. "Me too. I've never felt anything like this before. It's calm, but also everything else at once." She laughed, the sound light and melodic, and it echoed in the quiet room, wrapping around me like a blanket. We didn't rush. There were no dramatic confessions beyond what had already been spoken, only the subtle, meaningful presence of each other. Every glance, every touch, every shared breath was a declaration, gentle and real. Later, as we moved to the living room to settle on the sofa, I felt her shoulder brush against mine, and we naturally leaned closer, sharing the warmth. The tension of the past days, the uncertainty, the quiet battles with our own hearts, it had all transformed into a steady, comforting closeness. I could feel the calm steadiness of her heartbeat through the small space between us, and it made my chest ache with a quiet joy. We spent the day together in small, ordinary ways, arranging books, sharing tea, laughing over trivialities, but every moment was infused with significance. The connection we had nurtured through lingering glances, subtle touches, and shared vulnerability had matured into something warm, real, and undeniably ours. By evening, as the sun dipped low and the room glowed with amber light, we sat side by side, fingers intertwined, quiet and content. There were no words needed. The space between us hummed with mutual understanding, trust, and affection. I realized that the slow-burn journey, the hesitation, the longing, the shared secrets, and small gestures, had led us here, to a place of emotional fulfillment that was tender, steady, and profoundly satisfying. And as she leaned slightly against my shoulder, a quiet smile playing on her lips, I knew that my heart had finally found a home, one that was safe, warm, and entirely hers. The slow-burn connection, once tentative and uncertain, had blossomed into a quiet romance that felt timeless, intimate, and complete.